समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
In the middle of an uneasy ceasefire, in the course of a very nasty war between two sides, Israel, US, and GCC, Arab states on one side, and Iran on the other. Within that, a new war has broken out within the GCC states on one of the warring sides. So this is as if the whole GCC grouping is now unraveling. Iran may or may not have won or lost. That is a debate that the partisans will settle one way or the other and let them have their own views. But the fact is that the war so far has led to a break between UAE and Saudi Arabia. Two states with very close relations, two states where the rulers have had very close personal relations, so close that between these two, one country has a native population of just over 1.1, 1.15. That is about 11 lakh to 11.5 lakh people, maybe 12 lakh people. The other one has about 3.5 crore people. So a total of just about 3.62 crore people. Between them, they have a trade of $31 billion. The Riyadh-Dubai air corridor is the 7th busiest air corridor in the world. That's how close these two countries are. They are tied together in the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, which is a grouping of Gulf petro monarchies. That is, once again, we'll do a count. You start from the south: Oman, UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait. 6 of them. There's been a break. It's not the first time there's been a break, but right now the break looks rather severe because UAE has decided to walk out of OPEC. OPEC is Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It is at this point a grouping of 12 member countries, but with UAE going out, it will become 11. I will give you the list of the 12, and then other lists will come in as we go along. So please keep an eye out. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, UAE. The first 3 are listed in the order of the volumes that they export every day. The oil that they pull out and export because they all have quotas under OPEC. Saudi Arabia number 1 at about 9.3 million barrels per day. Iraq number 2 at 4.3 million barrels per day. And UAE, and that's the tricky part. Not long ago, their quota was only 2.8 billion, but everybody thought that they were undercounting and they were pulling out about 3.3 million. They were exporting that much. Right now, their exports might be 3.4 million. That is if all the exports were possible. All the exports are not possible. But UAE also has a workaround because of a pipeline that opens out in the Gulf of Oman through Al Fujairah, which is one of the Emirates. So they can bypass, not fully, but they can bypass for a lot of their production, they can bypass the Strait of Hormuz. After these 3, that is Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and UAE, we have Kuwait, Iran in the same neighborhood, Algeria, Libya, Nigeria, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, all in Africa, and then Venezuela, far away in Southern America. These are the members of OPEC these days. With UAE gone, there'll be one short. More importantly, there'll be 13% of their surplus short. What that 13% shortfall means is that accordingly, this will lessen OPEC's ability to act as a cartel and control global oil prices because it's in the interest of OPEC countries. In fact, it's in the interest of any country to keep the prices of what it exports or what it sells to the world higher. In this case, this is a cartel. Sometimes they make adjustments according to each other's interests. Somebody wants a higher price, somebody wants a lower price. And on top of everybody is the big daddy, that is Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants lower oil prices. In fact, Donald Trump has been attacking oil producing countries, particularly OPEC, for keeping oil prices too high because he wants cheap oil. He also put this in his Davos speech. So he is very exercised about this, and that is where his impatience comes in. That is where, because the Gulf countries want to suck up to Trump all the time, they've been offering to produce more oil, pull out more oil to keep prices down. However, there's a conflict there. Saudi Arabia is making very big investments now in real estate, in building new cities. The Noaim city, for example, very ambitious, fantasy-like projects. For that, they need more money. Where will the money come from? That money will come from oil. So Saudi Arabia would prefer oil prices to be closer to $90 a barrel. For UAE, 60, 62 is just fine. One, because it's cheaper for them to pull out their oil. Second, their economy already has other sources of income because of so much investment that's gone from outside. And that tension also remains. Now, UAE is upset that they are being limited to producing as much oil as they do, which is their quota is 2.88 million barrels a day. They might produce 3.4, that is the allegation. OPEC, by the way, has now dumped both the global agencies that estimate oil production. That is the EIA, the American Energy Information Administration, and the other international group, International Energy Agency. Both of these OPEC has now dumped as authentic sources of oil production, because OPEC countries themselves are competing very severely amongst themselves. I will just tell you a little bit more about OPEC, because there is also something called OPEC Plus, and then we will come to the action part. Action part is, why is this happening and why the tension between UAE and Saudi Arabia, otherwise brotherly nations. In fact, I see a story that mentions that in December, Saudi Arabia released a 5-para statement in which they used word shakika, which is the Arabic for brotherly, 4 times. 4 times they use the word brotherly in a 5-para statement on their bombing an arms shipment from UAE. So the brotherly country, or shakika in this case, was UAE, whose arms shipment to Yemenis, to their supported Yemeni group, they had just bombed. That's the kind of tension that's been building up between UAE and Saudi Arabia. We will come to that. That's the action part. Before that, let me just tell you a little bit more about OPEC, and also another entity called OPEC Plus, because very few countries in the world have surplus oil. Oil is money, because if you have oil that you don't need, you can sell it, and everybody is in a bit of a hurry to sell oil, because the projections are that in the next 10 years, global oil demand will start declining. That's because renewables will come in. In India, for example, we hardly use any hydrocarbons to produce any electricity. We use coal, and increasingly now we are using solar. In fact, solar renewables by and large, most of which is solar. So solar, hydel, wind, all of that already in India is 52% of all our electricity generation, and that's how we were able to withstand 256 gigawatt of demand on one afternoon earlier this week. That's a record in India's history. Remember, 52% of that came from renewables. The rest came from coal. Almost all of the rest came from coal. India doesn't burn any hydrocarbons as in oil and gas to make power, and increasingly more countries will get into nuclear, etc. And oil, the use for oil will also decline as more and more countries first produce electricity from non-hydrocarbon sources, or from renewables, or from green hydrogen going ahead, and increasingly automobiles become electric. Once more automobiles become electric, in China 30% are already electric, numbers rising. In India it's about 3%, but the number is rising, and the number will rise very fast. The demand for oil may start declining 10 years from now. So this is really something that is going out of fashion. So right now there is a rush to sell as fast as you can, and that's where competition comes in. And oil is also very political. That's why at one point the Americans will put sanctions on the sale of Russian oil. Tomorrow they will lift the sanctions on Russian oil because they want to curb any sales by the Iranians. At the same time, They do not want oil prices going too high. So oil is also a very political commodity. That's why these cartels come up, and the cartels don't always survive because there is always tension amongst cartels. So how did OPEC start? It started earlier on in the late 50s with an organization loosely called Seven Sisters. These Seven Sisters were basically seven big oil MNCs or their predecessors. These companies include ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, companies like that. Then, as more sovereigns took control of their oil resources, in September 60, the first multinational group came in, that was OPEC. So, OPEC was founded in 1960 with Iran, Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. Five countries. Five countries came together to set up OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Then this carried on like that. There wasn't much action. And then October 1973 came the Yom Kippur War between Israel, Egypt, and the Arab world. This is when the Arab members of OPEC decided to put an embargo on oil supplies to America for helping Israel in the war. That shot up global oil prices. Remember, the amount of oil they had put under embargo was only 7% of the global supply. But this is a very, very sensitive commodity. Because of that, global prices went up. In India also prices went up. It was following on from that India's inflation rates by 1974 had gone up to about 28%. That is when the world for the first time saw the power of the oil cartels. In the course of time, more joined these five. I told you about the original five: Iran, Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Subsequently, they were joined by Qatar, which again left in 2019. It's very difficult to keep track because these memberships keep going in and out. It's mostly politically inspired. So Qatar joined and then left in 2019. Remember, that's when UAE and Saudi Arabia were at odds with Qatar. They had put an embargo on Qatar. Why? Because they thought Qatar was backing the Islamists and financing the Islamists. Also, they thought Qatar was running Al Jazeera, which was undermining their governments, while at the same time not bothering the Qataris ruling family at all in any manner whatsoever. We had featured this in an episode of Cut the Clutter some time back, couple of years back. That is when peace was made between Qatar and its other brotherly countries. That expression you will see coming back all the time as these countries fight and they make up Shakika, brother. UAE, by the way, had joined OPEC in 1967 before it had become independent. UAE got its independence in 1971, but 67, as still a British colony for all practical purposes, it became a member of OPEC. After that, I told you, Qatar joined and left. Angola, Ecuador, Indonesia were in and out. That's the reason it's difficult to freeze a moment and say these are the members of OPEC. However, in the course of time, OPEC got expanded because everybody with oil surplus and with technology improving, more and more countries were able to take out surplus oil. They saw the value in cartelizing. So that led to the creation of OPEC Plus. OPEC Plus now had Russia, the big supplier, Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Bahrain, Brunei, Malaysia, Mexico, Oman, South Sudan, Sudan, and Brazil. All of them, however, will now suffer a setback with UAE going out because UAE and Saudi Arabia are two countries which have the most surplus oil in terms of their supplies being elastic. They are the ones who can either increase supplies or control supplies. They are the ones with the ability of playing the market. And this is where UAE has now gone out, and UAE now says we are not bound by any rules. We will do our own thing. Once we know that we can pull out as much oil as we want and sell it in global markets, we will invest more in our pipelines. So we will not even be so dependent on the Strait of Hormuz, because once Iran has discovered the value of Strait of Hormuz, that this is a choke point, we don't know what will happen tomorrow. So time has come for us to buy or invest in our freedom from this choke point. And that's only possible if we pull out more oil and sell it. That's why UAE has been talking in terms of taking its own exports up to 4.8 billion barrels a day. The action that UAE has now taken is not purely driven by business needs. That is one of the reasons, but essentially this is a strategic move because for a long time UAE and Saudi Arabia have been drifting apart. They've been very close, but they've been drifting apart. Why? One of the reasons is that Saudi Arabia has now begun to modernize. They want more professionals to come in. They want more international companies to set up their headquarters there. And they've been squeezing, or at least that's what the Emiratis say, they've been squeezing the companies that made Emirates their home to move to Saudi Arabia instead. That is where the competition element comes in. The second thing is that across the Red Sea, both sides have conflicting interests. This is in Sudan. Saudis support the Sudanese armed forces, which is like the original government of Sudan, whereas the Emiratis support rapid support forces, which is a kind of militia but very powerful. And Sudan is sort of divided between the two while a civil war goes on there. Now, why the two have conflicting interests? It's not very easy to say. Maybe some of it is ego, maybe some of it is who's more Islamic and who's less Islamic. Generally, if you read the Emirati social media, it would suggest that Saudis are backing those factions in these countries that are more Islamic. UAE is completely done with political Islam. They are done with political Islam. They are very westernized. They have now hitched their boat with the West. Also Israel, they have recognized Israel. They have embassies in each other's countries. They are also key to I2U2, where India is the other I besides Israel. Of course, USA is the other U. So that there is that political and ideological difference as well. Now, a simpler explanation on this I read in The Economist. It says UAE despises political Islam, Saudi Arabia tolerates it. To which I will add that Qatar plays both sides, sometimes both sides against the third, or as we might say in Haryanvi or Punjabi English, they play both of three sides. Both of three sides means they play the Islamists on one side, they play the liberals on the other. Not really liberals, but people like UAE, even the Saudis in comparison. Saudis don't like Muslim Brotherhood, whereas Qatar patronizes Muslim Brotherhood. That's where they operate from. At the same time, the third, which is the Western power, Qatar also hosts the headquarters of the US Central Command. That is what justifies that juvenile sounding flourish from me. Qatar playing both of them three, because that's what Qatar does. This tamasha is going on within this region among all these brothers. See the situation right now. Until a few years ago, UAE and Saudi Arabia, they had joined hands to sideline, to isolate and to embargo Qatar. Now Qatar is offering to mediate between UAE and Saudi Arabia. And similarly, you can see what's happening as you go a bit south in Asia. Pakistan is trying to or hoping to mediate between Iran and the Arab countries and the US, indirectly Israel, although they will never say that. At the same time, the Iranian foreign minister is now offered to mediate between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So everybody is fighting everybody, and everybody is offering to mediate between two other belligerents. That is the free-for-all that's going on in this entire landmass now, and all of this is fueled by surplus oil as well. Or to put it a little bit differently, the UAE would like to believe, or their social media, which has now been totally unleashed on Saudi Arabia, and vice versa. That compliment is returned in full measure. In fact, it's much nastier in many places than the Indian and Pakistani social media attacking each other. The UAE thinks that Mohammed bin Salman is now sold to Islamists. The Saudis are suggesting this is all each one's state-sponsored social media. The Saudis suggest or insinuate that UAE is nothing, Emiratis are nothing but handmaidens of the Israelis. UAE, besides the fact that it gains economically by breaking away from OPEC because it no longer has any quotas, it can produce as much oil as it wants, it also wants strategic autonomy. That's the reason, just as Saudi Arabia has gone and embraced Pakistan more tightly, has also underwritten the UAE loan for Pakistanis so that the Pakistanis don't roll over. UAE has reached out to India. Now, we don't exactly know why it happened and what happened then, but remember that very mysterious 3-hour visit that the UAE ruler Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed made to New Delhi. He just came in for 3 hours, met Prime Minister Modi, National Security Advisor, the Foreign Minister, and went right back. And now, 15th of May, as Prime Minister Modi goes on his Europe trip, the news only came in today. In fact, it was our scoop by Keshav Padmanabhan. See the story on your screens, that the Prime Minister will make a stopover in UAE, in Abu Dhabi, for how long? For exactly 3 hours. So something is happening between India and UAE. UAE has made that choice because India is the other eye in I2U2, as I told you. Within the Arabian Peninsula, UAE thinks that they are much smarter. They are smarter, niftier, their armies, small armed forces are smaller, but much more battle-worthy than lazy Saudis. All of that they have. They also think that economically they've done so much better. They've invested, they created wealth. They built a genuine global city to rival Singapore. Who are these Saudis to patronize us? Saudis treat the UAE as a younger brother, chota bhai, maybe a little bit rebellious. But you know, in any family, how younger brothers, little brothers react if they are patronized like that. When the older brother says, you know your own place, tu bacha ban ke rahe, beta ban ke rahe, no younger sibling likes it, particularly when the younger sibling thinks that he is much smarter than the other. That's also playing out right now in the Arabian Peninsula. Usually, if you follow the media in the two countries, they've never attacked each other. Social media also never attacks each other. In the past, if anybody on social media in UAE attacked Saudis, or somebody in Saudi social media attacked the UAE, they'll get summons from the police. Now, exactly the opposite is happening. Each side has declared open season on the other. One calls the other sold to Islamists or being scared of Islamists. The other returns the compliment by calling this one sold to the West, sold to Zionists, sold to Israel, etc. And yet both are under attack from Iran. Once again, the Emirati grievance is that while we were both attacked by Iran, Iran focused on UAE a lot more than even Israel. That's a fact that we featured in a whole episode of Cut the Clutter, of which I will share a link with you with the description. Saudis, on the other hand, looks like want to make some kind of a deal with the Iranians. They don't want to fight this war, and if at all they fight, they'd rather have the Pakistanis do chota bada fighting for them. Now I covered the first Gulf War, and I saw the Saudi forces were really very well equipped. In fact, they looked better equipped than American forces. If anything, their weapons looked newer because obviously they'd never been used. And that's where I remember P.J. O'Rourke, my favorite writer, outrageous writer. He had come to write a long essay about that war, and his essays were published in Rolling Stone magazine, later came out in collections of books. So this is in a collection called Give War a Chance. He was an outrageous writer. You did not expect him to say give peace a chance, give war a chance. These were his essays from many battlegrounds. And there he describes how beautifully kitted out a Saudi soldier is. But he says, but the heaviest thing you've seen a Saudi soldier lift is his paycheck. For everything else, he's got a Pakistani. So Saudis are not people whose armies want to fight. However well kitted out they might be, that's the reason they now have the Pakistanis there. And they also know the Pakistanis will not fight the Iranians, but they think Pakistanis will protect them from their own people should an Arab Spring kind of situation arise, which the Iranians at any point of time will try to orchestrate in their countries. Saudi armed forces are much larger than UAE's, but UAE's armed forces are much more efficient and much more professional than Saudi Arabia's and more willing to fight. Saudi problem is, and the Qatari problem is, that they have very shiny Western equipment, but their armed forces are not willing to fight. Whereas UAE, much smaller population, 125th, approximately 125th or approximately 4% of Saudi Arabia. They are more willing to fight. And just recently we saw a big news break from Axios by Barak Ravid that said that during the fighting, the Israelis had transferred the Iron Dome system to UAE to protect them, and also their own soldiers and officers to operate those Iron Dome systems in the UAE. So UAE has no hesitation about any of this. It's in the middle of this that UAE has also taken its action on Pakistan. UAE recalled its $3.5 billion loan from Pakistan. Until then, it was presumed by the Pakistanis and generally by watchers of the region that these loans will be rolled over. Arab nations who lend money to Pakistan, brotherly, Shakika, they keep on rolling over these loans. That's what brothers do, when you lend money to your younger brother, what do? But in this case, UAE recalled the loan. This is the loan Pakistanis thought will never be recalled. In fact, the Pakistanis had offered the UAE a deal, and Pakistanis believed that UAE was going to let Pakistan subsume $1 billion of this loan into equity for their army's conglomerate, their army's business conglomerate called Fauji Foundation. That is something that featured in the Pakistani media with great pride. All of that was now over. Why? Because UAE was now seeing Pakistan as an ally of the Saudis and as a security guarantor for the Saudis, who in turn were not willing to fight the Iranians. Think about how deep the UAE-Pakistan ties have been. See the story by Hamza Jilani in Pakistan and Andrew England in London. That tells you that after UAE became independent in 1971, the first 5 chiefs of UAE Air Force were Pakistani. They were drawn from Pakistan Air Force. In fact, even on my early visits to UAE, I found Pakistanis all over UAE bases, UAE armed forces, and also flying a lot of the UAE aircraft, civilian aircraft. The initial training and the aircraft for the airline in UAE was also provided by PIA. God forbid such a thing happens now. It'll be a joke, because today UAE has not one but 2 airlines which are global powerhouses, that is Emirates and Etihad. In fact, the two compete with each other. Now, I told you that in Sudan, the two sides are on different sides. In Libya also, they are on different sides. Once again, in Yemen, the first 2 battlegrounds are in Africa. Yemen is next door to Saudi Arabia. There, initially, UAE and Saudis were together against the Houthis. At some point, the UAE decided that they wanted another group. So they started backing a group called Southern Transition Council. That Southern Transition Council drove away the legitimate government, the original government of Yemen, and took a lot of territory in the south. The Saudis did not like that because, remember, unlike UAE, Saudis share a large border with Yemen, and that border was controlled by Houthis, and that is a very empty desert. The entire area is just an expanse of desert, almost impossible to guard. And that is how the Saudis now came in confrontation with the UAE. And that is how the Saudis came in confrontation with the UAE in Yemen. Once again, a key factor was a deepening Israel-UAE relationship. In the archipelago of Socotra of Yemen, Yemeni territory, UAE has set up listening posts and bases where Israeli equipment and Israeli soldiers have been present. And that is what the Saudis also did not like. Similarly, if you come a little bit southeast, you come to Somalia. In Somalia, the UAE made an alliance with the group ruling Somaliland, and they recognized Somaliland, which is what Israelis also patronize. Now, Saudi complaint with UAE is that you are going to all these Islamic countries and making alliances with rebel groups. UAE's explanation is, look, we are not stupid. These are failed states. It's much better to have alliances with people who have real power, or groups that have real power, instead of having formal Nam Ka Waste alliance with failed states who can do nothing for you. So that Somalia is one more area of conflict between UAE and Saudi Arabia. And then if you go deeper, in fact, one of these days I'm going to do a full episode on the Horn of Africa. If you go deeper, then the tension between Eritrea and Ethiopia. UAE is now aligned with Ethiopia, Eritrea has the support of Saudi Arabia, and the two countries are on the verge of a war. So another war is on the verge of breaking out in Africa, not very far from the current battlefield in West Asia.